Okay, let's jump right into this explainer by looking at a pretty wild political paradox. Right now, there are exactly 13 Sikh members of parliament sitting in India's legislative body, which has 543 seats. But if you look across the globe over to Canada, there are 18 Sikh MPs sitting in a significantly smaller parliament of just 388 seats. It's an incredible statistic, and it immediately makes you wonder, how on earth did this happen? Now, here's the real kicker. This specific community makes up just 2.1% of the entire Canadian population, meaning they hold a higher percentage of representation in a foreign nation's parliament than they actually do in their country of origin. This isn't just some random fluke in the data. It's actually the direct result of well over a century of deep-rooted migration and some seriously strategic community building. So, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to peel back the layers of a 120-year-old relationship between Canada and the Indian state of Punjab. It's a fascinating story full of early explorers, systemic pushback, sheer political genius, and a modern-day economic crisis. To make sense of this complex web, here is our roadmap. 1. The Canada-Punjab connection. 2. Early history and deep roots. 3. Rise in Canadian politics. 4. The 1980s and radical extremism. And finally, 5. Punjab's modern economic crisis. All right, Section 1, the Canada-Punjab connection. Let's find out how this transcontinental link actually got started. Believe it or not, this whole thing sparked way back in 1897. Sikh soldiers from the British Army were heading home from London after attending Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Led by Major Kesser Singh, the regiment passed right through Vancouver, British Columbia. And what they saw there completely changed the trajectory of their community. They recognized this massive land of opportunity, natural wealth, and, maybe most importantly, a level of personal freedom that they just didn't have back in British-ruled India. When those soldiers got back to Punjab, the ideas spread like wildfire. Pretty soon, Punjabi laborers started packing up and migrating to British Columbia to work in the lumber mills, the mines, and on the railways. Moving on to Section 2, Early History and Deep Roots. And, as is sadly the case with so much history, early waves of migration rarely happen without some serious pushback. Things changed fast. By 1908, around 5,200 Indians had arrived in Canada, and about 90% of them were Sikh. They were working incredibly hard, usually for much lower wages, which quickly sparked fierce resentment and actual riots from the local white population. The Canadian press of the time offensively dubbed this the Hindu invasion, completely ignoring the religious realities. In response, immigrants formed the Ghadar Party in 1913 to resist British rule back home, but over in Canada, the systemic barriers were only getting stronger. Because Britain ruled both Canada and India at the time, Canadian authorities couldn't just overtly ban Indians based on race. So they used legislative tricks. They passed a law requiring immigrants to have $200 on them the second they arrived. Now, to put that into perspective, the average Indian back then earned about 10 cents. It was a near impossible sum. Even crazier, they created a continuous journey rule, meaning you had to travel directly from your home country without a single stop, which was literally geographically impossible for ships coming from India back then. This systemic exclusion eventually peaked with a deeply tragic event known as the Komagata Maru incident in 1914. A wealthy Sikh businessman decided to challenge these discriminatory laws directly by chartering a ship and bringing 376 passengers straight to Vancouver. But despite actually meeting those strict financial requirements, the ship was detained at the border for 2 entire months. Ultimately, only 23 people were allowed in. Everyone else was turned away, forced to sail all the way back to Kolkata. And when they arrived, clashes with British authorities resulted in the deaths of over 24 passengers. It's a massive stain on Canadian history, one that modern prime ministers have formally apologized for. And it's a memory deeply embedded in the community's culture today. Section 3, Rise in Canadian Politics. So, skipping ahead past their hard-fought battle for voting rights in 1947, how exactly did a marginalized community become such undeniable political heavyweights? To really understand their success, you have to look at the unique mechanics of how Canadian party nominations actually work. Unlike in some countries where party bosses just pick a candidate, in Canada, it's all about who can sign up the most local members. And honestly, this is where the Sikh community had an absolute tactical masterclass. By using highly connected Gurdwara networks, they could mobilize thousands of unified signatures and votes for a specific candidate almost overnight. It's a level of tight-knit organization that other, more fractured groups just couldn't match. Just look at Jagmeet Singh's campaign for the head of the New Democratic Party. He leveraged this exact playbook. He managed to sign up 47,000 new party members. When it came time to vote, he absolutely crushed the competition, securing over 35,000 votes while the runner-up got about 11,000. It was a total game changer. Politicians across the spectrum quickly woke up to a new reality. If you ignore this unified demographic, you're probably going to lose the election. All right, Section 4, the 1980s and radical extremism. Now we need to look at a much darker, highly complex chapter that forever altered the nature of this migration. The whole dynamic shifted completely in 1984. Following Operation Blue Star and the devastating anti-Sikh riots in Delhi after the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, a deep, deep sense of injustice took root. This subsequent wave of migration in the 1980s and 90s, it wasn't about economics at all. People were fleeing out of intense trauma, anger, and a profound alienation from the Indian state. Now, this is absolutely crucial. We have to draw a hard line here. The vast majority of everyday, non-resident Indian Sikhs are completely focused on their education, taking out loans, and building a better life for their families. They are entirely distinct from the radicalized, separatist, fringe elements that also emerged in Canada during this era to push an anti-India agenda. It's a shame because hardworking families often find themselves unfairly caught in the crossfire of these highly politicized labels. That exact radical fringe was responsible for one of the deadliest acts of aviation terrorism in history, the 1985 Air India Flight 182 bombing. Orchestrated by Canada-based extremists, the explosion claimed 329 innocent lives. And despite repeated warnings from Indian intelligence at the time, the plot still succeeded. Astoundingly, only one person was ever truly held accountable for it. It's a lingering, open wound that drives massive geopolitical friction between India and Canada to this very day. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Punjab's modern economic crisis. Let's peel back the last layer and look at the modern-day drivers pushing today's youth toward Canada. This is basically the ultimate paradox of the Green Revolution. Decades ago, Punjab's incredibly fertile lands actually solved India's hunger crisis. The state pivoted to producing massive amounts of rice and wheat, and for a while, it became the richest state in India. But the long-term losses have been absolutely devastating. Over-farming these water-intensive crops led to severe water depletion and soil degradation. And because local politicians were entirely hyper-focused on agriculture, they completely missed the boat on the booming IT sector that enriched the rest of India. And the fallout today? It's staggering. Punjab is currently buried under 2.92 lakh crore rupees of state debt. Think about that. Once the absolute powerhouse of the Indian economy, its state GDP ranking has plummeted all the way down to 19th in the country. The initial massive wealth of the Green Revolution basically evaporated into a heavily degraded ecosystem. So put yourself in the shoes of a young person there today. Agricultural growth is stuck at a measly 1.6%, and there is virtually zero IT sector to pivot into. They are basically trapped. With no modern white-collar jobs at home, unemployed youth are taking out massive loans and doing whatever it takes. They are tapping into those century-old networks, leaning on the Canadian diaspora to escape what feels like an economic dead end. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Given this deeply intertwined century of history, this highly effective political integration we talked about, and the severe modern-day economic pressures pushing the youth outward, what do you think the next chapter holds? Will the Canada-Punjab pipeline ever truly close, or is it just destined to evolve into a whole new era?